Hi everyone, my name is Thomas Wiig, and today I'll be talking to you about my most intriguing research discovery while I've been at Penn. So I'm an international relations and economics major. I also do a little bit of French and Spanish. Um, I've been fortunate enough to have been able to study in France twice during my undergraduate years. I did a summer program, Penn and Tours, when I was during the summer of 2017, and then I did an exchange semester at Sciences Po in France in the spring of 2018. It's a political science school in Paris. Um, so between these two experiences, I've been able to see a lot of international relations and economics firsthand while in France as well as in the United States, and I think that's been a very interesting dichotomy to kind of take into account there. Um, and so this kind of birthed the idea for my thesis, right? So my thesis is about Franco-German relations since 1990. And the idea itself stems from the 2017 election they had over there. Now, the 2017 election in France was a very interesting one. It came in the wake of Great Britain's decision to leave the European Union, as well as the United States' decision to elect Donald Trump. And these two events were kind of seen by a lot of commentators in American and British magazines, right, as journals, as sort of protectionist measures, as anti-globalization, as retrenchment of major Western democracies, which concerned a lot of people watching. Um, and so this election was naturally a big subject of the news running up to it because it was these two candidates, both outside of the traditional political spectrum. I mean, Macron was running on his own newly formed party, which literally translates to onwards or moving forward. And then you had Marine Le Pen with the National Front. Um, and these two, I mean, they were both outside the traditional political spectrum of Republican and socialist within France, who had basically um, been the parties of every past president in the Fifth Republic. Um, Taking all these things into consideration, I mean, people were overjoyed when Macron had won because they thought, Western world order is saved. But I think there's a lot more to this election than just that. Because I feel like a lot of people saw this election happen and they saw Macron won and they said, oh, everything's okay now, Europe's moving forward. That's that. But I think there's a lot more at stake here and a lot more to be looked at. Because this election was between a 39-year-old ex-investment banker elected on a policy of financial and fiscal reform. He was finance minister under the socialists, but his policies are more, American rather than French in nature, if you know what I mean. Um, and he's kind of pushing this agenda that's not very French, but is also make France great again almost. Like people have said that jokingly about his campaign, right? Um, he's even called for wide-reaching reform of Europe itself. He's very pro-European. He wants to engage in everything through Europe rather than doing everything on his own. And on the other side, Marine Le Pen, she's obviously the anti-European candidate. She doesn't want to see Europe live another day. Um, and so I think these two sides of the coin are very interesting, but they're the same coin, right? Um, Within France, I think there's a lot of frustration, a lot of concern for the future of France, and I'm trying to see where that comes from. And I think I figured it out. Um, so my thesis is about Franco-German relations, and if I'm sure you're aware, France and Germany have not always been the best of friends. After two world wars and then the Franco-Prussian War, Napoleonic wars, they've been at war a lot of times basically. Things have never been friendly between the two, but after, countless national humiliations and mutual destructions in 1963, they decided to sign the Elysee Treaty, which basically stipulates that France and Germany would be friends from this day forward. And they've together formed the basis of European construction since the formation of the coal and steel community, which, I mean, it's evident there alone that, Europe is based upon bringing these two countries closer together. I mean, coal and steel produced mostly in the regions where France and Germany share a border, and they're necessary wartime resources. So Europe's always been very much about these two countries, about the Franco-German alliance, and about bringing them together above all else. And furthermore, they've been very important in moving forward a lot of European integration efforts in history. Now, between 1945 and 1990, France was either more powerful or the two were relatively even. France began on better footing because it hadn't been totally destroyed or dismembered during the war. But Germany eventually caught up economically. Economically, Germany was seen as wielding, West Germany was seen as wielding economic preeminence, whereas France was seen as the more diplomatic power. It was a UN Security Council permanent veto member. It had nuclear weapons, it had a large standing army, all those sorts of things. So these two together were a very interesting pair. But what I'm sort of seeing is that since 1990, this relationship has very much changed. And I think that's evident when you look at the European debt crisis, because it was always Germany making the decisions there, right? It wasn't France and Germany, it was very much Germany with the Troika. And so the way relations have sort of progressed between these two countries has led me to kind of identify three large turning points. These are German reunification in 1990, which saw Germany add 16 million people to populations that were previously 60 million in France and 60 million in Germany. Germany now had almost 80 million people, whereas France was still at 60 million. It's a demographic and economic power that can't be ignored. And then additionally, with the adoption of the economic and monetary union, Germany was necessarily the most important player because of its history in being good with controlling inflation. The Bundesbank and the Deutschmark were the most, secure currencies in Europe and secure central bank in Europe, let's say. And so necessarily Germany was the most important actor, and today the Bundesbank is in Frankfurt. And then I think the third thing that I'm identifying here is the Hartz reforms. And the Hartz reforms are a collection of 4 laws passed between 2003 and 2005, which sort of changed the German labor force, the benefits that people receive and all sorts of things like that, to make the continental style conservative welfare regime into something more similar to the United States, the United Kingdom, or even Scandinavia. And these systems together combined, I argue, kind of pushed Germany to the top of Europe and displaced, the balanced partnership or even French-dominated partnership that existed during the Cold War. And so now France is sort of kind of coming to terms with that conclusion, in my eyes. Examining these 3 events has led me to, 3 implications that my thesis sort of makes. The first is that within Europe, there's an element of competition that exists. This competition can take the form of economics, politics, whatever. At the end of the day, France and Germany are still great friends. They've made amazing steps in the past 100 years, obviously. But that doesn't mean that their relationship isn't free of competition. I mean, France still puts France first, and Germany still puts Germany first. And luckily, they often align in their interests. But today we're seeing with the Eurozone, for example, that reform isn't really aligning. Germany does not want the Eurobonds that Macron is asking him to make national level priorities, The second implication here is that Europe is a means to greatness for France. So Europe has, since de Gaulle, been a very important aspect of French foreign policy. And I'm sort of saying that that continues through the present day. I mean, under de Gaulle, he can be quoted as saying that European Union essentially is the means for France to recover what it ceased to be after Waterloo, first in the world. So sort of a way to punch above its weight and compete with powers like the former Soviet Union, like with the United States, and like with China. And I think that's apparent even through the present day. And so I think that's very evident within French and German politics as well. And I think that's very important to take into consideration as we see Europe move forward into the 21st century. And lastly, I think French frustration is at an all-time high with Europe. This doesn't mean Europe is going to collapse tomorrow. I think Europe is very important, almost too important to France. But I do think that France wants to be at a more level playing field with Germany, wants to be able to move forward with this project, and it wants to do it on, French terms to an extent. So I think that 2017 election is a representation of this frustration with France's, second place status within Europe, within Europe's trouble in competing with the United States, now China, and I think we're sort of seeing the implications of that in French politics. Now, where this goes from here, there's a lot of ways, and I could talk about this for another 30 minutes or so. But I think that Macron is gonna, go down in history in one of two ways. I mean, I'm cheering for him because I think he's what France needs, but he could go down either as, Gerhard Schroeder, who successfully reformed the German economy, lowered the unemployment rate from 10% at its peak, and today Germany's unemployment rate's at 3%. Before Schroeder had been at 10% for 3 decades or so. So I think that's where he could be. But Schroeder was also unelected because these reforms, which succeeded in lowering unemployment, were widely unpopular. Or he could be, a Matteo Renzi, gridlocked by domestic troubles, by the lack of support and unity within his own party and within his own country. I think these are two directions which Macron can take, and I'm hoping he's more of a Schroeder, but he could be a Renzi. Looking forward for Europe, I don't think there's any real concern between, French and German relations going too far south. I do think we should stay alert, right? We should be cognizant of the fact that there is competition between the two. But they've come so far and they're so close today that I don't think a lot can threaten them. Anyways, thank you for listening to this way too long Ben talk. I appreciate you being interested in what I'm talking about, and yeah, thank you.